You picked up your coffee this morning the same way you have for decades. Same cup, same routine, same ritual. But what if something as simple as what you add to that cup, something that costs less than $1 a day, was quietly doing something remarkable inside your cells? Not in theory, not someday, right now, every morning. We're not talking about a supplement with a long, unpronounceable name. We're not talking about a diet that turns your life upside down. And we're definitely not talking about anything that requires a prescription. What we're talking about is a specific type of fat, one that researchers have been studying for years, one that your body processes in a way that's completely different from any other fat you've ever eaten. And when you combine it with coffee, at the right time, in the right way, something measurable starts to happen. Your cells start burning fuel more efficiently, your metabolism shifts, and the internal environment that supports your health begins to change in ways that matter deeply after the age of 60. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what that fat is, why it works, what the research actually shows, and precisely how to use it starting tomorrow morning. No fluff, no exaggeration. Just the science, explained clearly and honestly. So let's get into it. Let's start with what's actually happening inside your body after 60. Because to understand why this morning protocol matters, you first need to understand what's changing, and why those changes connect to each other in ways most people never hear explained. There are 3 biological shifts that tend to accelerate after 60. And the reason they matter isn't just because each one is significant on its own. It's because they feed into each other. They create a cycle. And once that cycle gets moving, it picks up speed. The first shift is what scientists call mitochondrial decline. You've probably heard of mitochondria. They're often described as the powerhouses of your cells, and that description, while simple, is accurate. Every time you move, think, breathe, digest, or heal, your mitochondria are generating the energy that makes it possible. When you're young, your cells are packed with mitochondria. They're efficient, they're numerous, and they recover quickly from stress. But starting in your 50s and accelerating through your 60s and beyond, 2 things begin to happen. The number of mitochondria in your cells starts to decline, and the ones that remain become less efficient at producing energy. Researchers estimate that by the time most people reach their late 60s, their mitochondrial energy output has dropped by somewhere between 40 and 50% compared to their younger years. That's not a small change. That's half the cellular energy your body used to run on. And you feel it. You feel it in the fatigue that arrives earlier in the day than it used to. You feel it in how long it takes to recover after physical activity. You feel it in the mental fog that occasionally settles in when it never used to. That's not weakness, that's biology, and it's important to name it clearly. The second shift involves your stem cells. Now, when most people hear stem cells, they think of embryos or medical procedures. But adult stem cells are something different and something you have right now. In your bone marrow, your muscles, your gut, your brain. These cells are your body's repair crew. When tissue gets damaged, when a muscle fiber tears slightly during exercise, when cells in your gut lining need replacing, when your immune system needs refreshing. Stem cells are what answer that call. In your younger years, that repair process is brisk and responsive. But after 60, the activity of these cells begins to slow. They become less responsive. The repair signals don't travel as efficiently. And the result is slower recovery, slower tissue renewal, and a gradual accumulation of cellular wear that the body can no longer keep up with at its previous pace. This isn't a sudden stop, it's a gradual dimming. But it's real, and it has consequences that ripple through every system in your body. The third shift is metabolic. After 60, most people's insulin sensitivity declines. That means the body becomes less efficient at using insulin to move glucose from the bloodstream into cells. And in response, the body produces more insulin to compensate. More circulating insulin promotes fat storage, particularly around the abdomen and around your organs. This is what researchers call visceral fat. And unlike the fat just under your skin, visceral fat is metabolically active in ways that are harmful. It releases inflammatory signals. It interferes with hormone regulation. It contributes to insulin resistance, which worsens the problem further. At the same time, the body becomes increasingly reliant on glucose as its primary fuel source. And here's where it gets interesting, because that metabolic glucose dependency doesn't just affect your waistline. It creates an internal environment that influences cellular behavior across your entire body. Now, here's the part that most explanations of aging leave out. These three processes, mitochondrial decline, reduced stem cell activity, and metabolic dysregulation, don't happen in isolation. They're connected. They amplify one another. Declining mitochondria reduce the energy available for stem cell function. Metabolic dysregulation increases cellular stress that further damages mitochondria. Excess visceral fat drives inflammation that accelerates all three. And as each one worsens, it makes the others worse too. That's the cycle. And understanding that cycle is the key to understanding why the intervention we're about to discuss is so much more interesting than just another dietary tip. Because if these three processes share underlying biological pathways, and research is increasingly showing that they do, then something that addresses those shared pathways could potentially interrupt the cycle at multiple points simultaneously. So what does that? Let's talk about fat. Specifically, a category of fat that most people walk past in the grocery store without giving it a second thought. All dietary fats are not the same. And one of the most important ways they differ is in the length of their carbon chains, because chain length determines how your body digests, absorbs, and ultimately uses them. The fats you're most familiar with, olive oil, butter, the fat in meat and fish, are what's called long-chain triglycerides. They have between 14 and 24 carbon atoms in their chain. Because of their size, they require a complex digestive process. They're broken down in the small intestine, packaged into structures called chylomicrons, absorbed into your lymphatic system, and eventually reach your bloodstream and liver through a slow, multi-step pathway. Medium-chain triglycerides are different. With only 6 to 12 carbon atoms, they're small enough to bypass that entire process. They're absorbed directly through the gut wall into the portal vein and travel straight to the liver. The whole process happens rapidly, and in the liver, something remarkable occurs. Instead of being stored as fat, MCTs are preferentially converted into molecules called ketone bodies. Specifically, a ketone called beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB. Now, BHB is not just fuel. That's the part that matters for this conversation. Yes, it's a fuel, and an excellent one. Your brain, your heart, and your muscles can all use ketones for energy. Some researchers argue the brain actually runs more efficiently on ketones than on glucose. But BHB also functions as a signaling molecule. It interacts with genes. It influences how your cells behave. It activates and suppresses pathways that govern some of the most fundamental processes in your body, including the very three processes we just discussed. That's what makes this interesting. Now, not all MCT oil is created equal, and this distinction is important, so pay close attention here. MCTs are classified by their carbon chain length. C6 has 6 carbons, C8 has 8, C10 has 10, C12 has 12. C6, also called caproic acid, converts to ketones quickly, but it's notorious for causing significant digestive distress, cramping, nausea, an urgent need to find a bathroom. You don't want C6 in your MCT oil. C8, caprylic acid, is the gold standard. It converts to ketones faster than any other MCT fraction, produces the highest BHB levels, and is well tolerated by most people. This is what you're looking for. C10, capric acid, converts to ketones slightly more slowly than C8, but is still effective and well tolerated. A blend of C8 and C10 is a good practical choice. C12, lauric acid, has 12 carbons and behaves much more like a long-chain fat. It doesn't convert to ketones efficiently at all. And here's the important part. Many inexpensive MCT oil products on the market are predominantly C12, or are essentially repackaged coconut oil, which is about 50% lauric acid. If you're buying MCT oil and the label doesn't specify C8 or C8-C10, or if lauric acid is listed as a primary ingredient, put it back on the shelf. The specific fraction matters. The label matters. And taking a moment to read it carefully before you buy will determine whether you're getting the real thing or paying for something that won't produce the effects we're about to describe. Now, let's get into the 5 mechanisms. This is the core of what the research shows, how MCT oil, converted to BHB ketones, interacts with your biology in ways that address the 3 aging processes we discussed at the start. We'll go through each one clearly and honestly, including being upfront about where the evidence is strong, where it's emerging, and where it's still primarily theoretical. Mechanism 1. Direct fat oxidation. The first thing MCT oil does is shift your body's fuel preference toward fat. When you consume MCT oil, especially in a fasted state, your liver rapidly produces ketones. Rising ketone levels signal to your body that fat is available as fuel. This suppresses glucose utilization and promotes what scientists call fat oxidation, the burning of fat for energy. A study published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics followed 49 adults over 16 weeks. One group consumed MCT oil as part of their diet. The other consumed olive oil. The MCT group showed meaningfully greater fat loss, particularly visceral fat, the dangerous fat stored around your organs. Now, MCT oil is not a miracle fat burner. It works within the context of your overall diet and lifestyle. But as one dietary modification, the evidence for its fat oxidizing effect is among the more consistent findings in this area of research. And for adults over 60, where visceral fat accumulates more easily and is harder to shift, even a modest advantage in fat oxidation compounds meaningfully over weeks and months. Mechanism 2. Mitochondrial support. Remember the decline in mitochondrial number and efficiency we discussed earlier? Here's where it gets interesting. Your cells have a built-in program for making new mitochondria. It's called mitochondrial biogenesis, and it's activated by a protein called PGC1 alpha, sometimes described as the master regulator of mitochondrial growth. When PGC1 alpha is active, your cells receive a signal to produce more mitochondria and to repair the ones they have. BHB, the ketone produced from MCT oil, has been shown to activate PGC1 alpha signaling. Studies in muscle tissue have shown significant increases in PGC1 alpha expression following sustained ketone elevation. More mitochondria in muscle tissue means more cellular energy capacity. More energy capacity means better endurance, faster recovery, and reduced fatigue. Separately, research published in Nature, one of the most rigorous scientific journals in the world, looked at how BHB interacts with a specific type of stem cell called hematopoietic stem cells. These are the cells responsible for producing blood and immune cells throughout your life. The research found that BHB helps maintain these stem cells in what's called a quiescent state, a carefully protected resting mode that actually preserves their long-term regenerative capacity. This is early-stage science. We want to be honest about that. This is not proven therapy. But it is a meaningful signal from credible research that ketone elevation may support the very stem cell function that declines with age. Mechanism 3. Cancer metabolism. This mechanism requires the most careful framing, so let's be precise. Cancer cells are metabolically unusual. Unlike healthy cells, which can switch flexibly between glucose and other fuel sources, most cancer cells are heavily dependent on glucose. They consume it at dramatically higher rates than normal cells and ferment it even in the presence of oxygen, a phenomenon discovered nearly a century ago called the Warburg effect. This glucose dependency is a real metabolic vulnerability, and researchers have been exploring for decades whether manipulating the metabolic environment, reducing available glucose, elevating ketones, might make that environment less hospitable to cancer cell growth. Animal studies have shown promising results. Tumor growth has been reduced and survival improved in animal models using ketogenic conditions combined with ketone supplementation. But, and this is critical, we do not yet have strong human clinical trial evidence that MCT oil or ketones treat or prevent cancer in humans. This is emerging science. It is not established medicine. It is absolutely not a substitute for conventional cancer screening, treatment, or medical care. What it may represent, and this is the honest, evidence-consistent framing, is a dietary approach that reduces some of the metabolic risk factors associated with cancer development. A less glucose-dependent internal environment, reduced visceral fat, lower circulating insulin. These are markers associated with reduced cancer risk in the epidemiological literature. So this mechanism is real and worth understanding, but it belongs in the category of risk factor reduction, not disease treatment. That distinction matters enormously. Mechanism 4, muscle preservation. After 60, muscle loss accelerates. The medical term is sarcopenia, the gradual loss of muscle mass and strength that occurs with aging. And it matters far more than most people realize. Muscle is not just about strength. It's your primary glucose disposal organ. It's central to metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, mobility, and fall prevention. Losing muscle accelerates virtually every aging process we've discussed. Ketones have an interesting relationship with muscle tissue. They appear to reduce the breakdown of muscle protein during periods of calorie deficit, what scientists call an anti-catabolic effect. At the same time, BHB has been shown to activate mTOR signaling, a pathway involved in muscle protein synthesis, through a mechanism that doesn't rely heavily on insulin. A 2019 study published in Nutrition and Metabolism followed 40 adults with mild sarcopenia. Those receiving 14 grams of MCT oil daily showed a meaningful loss in fat mass, combined with a small but significant gain in muscle mass. The control group lost both fat and muscle. The sample size is modest. This is one study. But it aligns with what the mechanistic research would predict. And it's the kind of outcome that matters practically for older adults trying to maintain function and independence. Mechanism 5. Synergy with caffeine. The fifth mechanism is about timing, and about why coffee specifically is the right vehicle for this protocol. Caffeine has well-documented effects on fat metabolism. It stimulates the release of fatty acids from fat cells into the bloodstream, making them available as fuel. This effect is measurable and consistent across the research literature. MCT oil, as we've established, drives fat oxidation, the body's capacity to actually burn those mobilized fatty acids. When you combine them, caffeine mobilizing fat from storage, MCT oil increasing the metabolic machinery to burn it, the effects work together. The mobilization and the oxidation happen simultaneously in a way that neither produces as effectively alone. Timing amplifies this further. Consuming MCT oil in coffee in a fasted state before eating anything maximizes both ketone production and fat oxidation. Your glycogen stores are partially depleted from overnight. Insulin is low. The metabolic conditions are aligned, and the combination of caffeine and MCT oil hits at precisely the moment when your body is most primed to respond to it. This is why the morning, fasted timing isn't just a preference, it's mechanistically significant. Now let's talk about exactly how to do this. The protocol is simple, but the details matter. So let's go through each element precisely. Choosing the right product. Look for MCT oil that specifies C8 only, or a CA8C10 blend. The label should list caprylic acid or caprylic and capric acid as the primary ingredients. If it says coconut oil or lists lauric acid prominently, it's not the right product. Spend a little more for a quality product. This is not the place to cut corners. Starting your dose, and this is important, start low. Begin with 1 teaspoon, that's approximately 5 grams. Stay at that dose for 3 to 4 days and let your digestive system adjust. The most common mistake people make with MCT oil is taking too much too soon. The result is cramping and digestive upset that's unpleasant enough to make them quit entirely. There's no need for that. Go slow. After 3 to 4 days at 1 teaspoon, increase to 1 tablespoon, approximately 14 grams. Most people find this to be their optimal daily dose. The research supporting the mechanisms we've discussed generally used doses in this range. You can gradually work up to 25 to 30 grams daily if you tolerate it well, but the meaningful benefits begin well before that ceiling. Preparation. And don't skip this part. You cannot simply stir MCT oil into your coffee. Oil and water don't mix, and if you stir it, you'll have a layer of oil floating on your coffee and significantly reduced absorption. You need to emulsify it. Use a small blender. A personal blender works perfectly. Or a milk frother. Blend for 15 to 20 seconds. What you'll get is a creamy, frothy coffee that looks almost like a latte. The emulsification dramatically improves absorption and creates a smoother, more sustained ketone response. Some people add a teaspoon of grass-fed butter or ghee to the blend. This is optional, but it adds a richness to the texture and provides additional fat-soluble nutrients. If you enjoy it, it's a fine addition. Timing. Consume your MCT coffee within 1 hour of waking. Don't eat anything before it. And after drinking it, delay your first meal by 2 to 3 hours. This fasted window is when the fat oxidation and ketone production are at their peak. Eating, especially carbohydrates, will raise insulin and shift your body out of that fat-burning state. The delay doesn't have to be extreme. 2 hours is sufficient for most people to capture the majority of the benefit. Supporting habits. The protocol works in isolation, but it works considerably better with 2 supporting practices. First, resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. This doesn't require a gym membership or heavy equipment. Bodyweight exercises, resistance bands, light weights. What matters is that you're giving your muscles a reason to grow and maintain. Mechanism 4. The muscle preservation effect is activated far more powerfully when combined with physical stimulus. Second, protein within 2 hours of exercise. 20 to 30 grams of protein after your workout gives your muscles the building blocks to respond to the stimulus you've given them. The combination of MCT oil's anabolic signaling and adequate protein intake is what the 2019 Sarcopenia study captured in its results. So what can you realistically expect, and when? In the first 1 to 2 weeks, most people notice 2 things. The first is a shift in morning energy, a cleaner, more sustained alertness compared to coffee alone. Ketones cross the blood-brain barrier efficiently, and the brain responds noticeably to having them available as fuel. The second is reduced morning hunger. Ketones are strongly appetite-suppressing, and many people find they're genuinely comfortable delaying breakfast in a way they weren't before. You may see a small drop on the scale in the first week or 2. This is largely water and glycogen. Don't overinterpret it. Real fat loss takes longer and is more gradual. Between weeks 3 and 8, fat loss becomes measurable, particularly around the abdomen. Energy during the day tends to stabilize. If you're exercising, you'll likely notice improved endurance and recovery. Strength should be maintained or improving even as weight drops, which is the outcome we're aiming for. At the 2 to 3 month mark, the deeper changes become apparent. Mitochondrial biogenesis takes time. The meaningful structural changes in muscle cell mitochondria emerge over weeks to months of consistent signaling. If you're monitoring blood markers, this is the window where you may start to see changes in triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, and fasting insulin, the markers most sensitive to metabolic improvement. Be patient with the timeline, and be consistent rather than perfect. Hitting this protocol 5 or 6 mornings out of 7 over 12 weeks will produce far more than doing it perfectly for 2 weeks and then abandoning it. Before we close, we need to address safety, because for most people this protocol is well tolerated, but there are specific situations where caution is warranted. If you have active liver disease, speak with your physician before adding MCT oil. Your liver is central to ketone production, and any condition affecting liver function changes the calculation. If you have type 1 diabetes, physician supervision is essential. Elevating ketones without careful management of insulin levels carries a risk of diabetic ketoacidosis, a serious condition. Do not attempt this without medical oversight. If you have type 2 diabetes and are currently on insulin or sulfonylurea medications, monitor your blood glucose carefully. MCT oil can improve insulin sensitivity meaningfully, which is generally a good thing, but it may require adjustments to your medication dosage that should be made with your doctor's guidance. If you're on warfarin, be aware that changes in dietary fat intake can affect vitamin K absorption and influence your INR. Monitor accordingly and keep your prescribing physician informed. For the majority of people over 60 without these conditions, MCT oil at the doses described in this protocol has a strong safety record. The side effects, when they occur, are almost exclusively digestive and almost exclusively the result of increasing the dose too quickly. And as with any dietary change, this is educational content. It is not medical advice. If you have any chronic condition or take any regular medication, a conversation with your doctor before starting is always the right move. Let's bring this together. After 60, 3 biological processes begin to accelerate: mitochondrial decline, reduced stem cell activity, and metabolic dysregulation. These processes are interconnected. They amplify one another, and they share underlying pathways that respond to elevated BHB ketones. C8 MCT oil, blended into morning coffee and consumed in a fasted state, elevates those ketones efficiently and consistently. Through 5 distinct mechanisms: fat oxidation, mitochondrial support, metabolic environment modulation, muscle preservation, and caffeine synergy, it interacts with those shared pathways in ways that the research supports. Not magic, not a cure, not a replacement for medical care, but a simple, low-cost, evidence-informed morning habit that works with your biology rather than against it. Tomorrow morning, start with 1 teaspoon of C8 MCT oil blended into your coffee. Drink it within an hour of waking. Wait 2 to 3 hours before eating. That's it. That's the beginning. Build from there. Gradually increase the dose over the following weeks. Add resistance training if you haven't already. Get your protein in after you exercise. And let the consistency do what consistency always does. Compound quietly over time into something you can actually feel and measure. In our next video, we're going to look at what happens when you combine this MCT coffee protocol with intermittent fasting, and what the research shows about how that combination affects the very metabolic markers most predictive of healthy aging. If this video was useful to you, consider sharing it with someone in your life who's navigating these same questions. And leave us a comment below with one question you still have after watching. We read them all, and they genuinely shape what we cover next. We'll see you in the next one.